Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Everybody, this is Sean Martin coming to you from RSA Conference 2023, where we get to talk to lots of people about lots of different things, trends and changes in the market and in the landscape of threats. And certainly businesses have been transforming. The question is, has security transformed to keep up? And I'm thrilled to have our friends from Quest Software, aka Quest, joining us today. They've been doing a lot of stuff for a lot of years, and we're going to hear a bit about their journey and kind of where things are headed. I have Sergey and Matthew joining. Sergey, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role, and maybe perhaps your journey to Quest.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm coming from the product management background. I used to work for Oracle and a few slightly smaller companies, venture-backed in the past, all the way in Silicon Valley. We're here in San Francisco. And the last few years prior to joining Quest, I spent at private equity funds making investments into companies like Quest. And what we're seeing is obviously this tremendous wave of opportunity for customers and vendors in the cybersecurity space, the cyber resilience specifically. And so we're very excited about this for our customers and for Quest, and particularly building on the expertise that Quest has created in the Active Directory and Microsoft overall space in the last over 35 years of its history.
Yep. Matthew.
Right. My name is Matthew Vinton. I am what we call a strategic systems consultant or a pre-sales engineer here at Quest. I'm a relative junior. I've only been here for 10 years. And before that, I actually worked for a customer of Quest, and we're dealing with some of the sort of earlier forms of challenges that I'm seeing all the time today. I work mainly with some of the larger organizations across North America, so I get a perspective on sort of the challenges that are out there, particularly challenges at scale.
And if you could, Matthew, quick overview of Quest. Many years in this space. What's that journey look like? Just kind of paint
Absolutely.
a picture.
So back in my pre-Quest days when I was a customer, that was actually a huge challenge, like getting my brain around everything that Quest did. So Quest got its start in the late 1980s with like database management. And in fact, that's still a big part of the Quest business. Now, Sergey and I, we're part of our Microsoft platform management. So we focus on the security primarily of Microsoft platforms. Quest got its start with that it was around the inception of Active Directory. So it would have been the late 90s, early 2000s that we began to get into that business. And we've been basically growing the breadth and depth of our capabilities around what we now term cyber resilience ever since.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing, interestingly, Matthew mentioned Active Directory, right, and the inception of it in 1999, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. And at the time, late 90s, we didn't really think actively about security, enterprise security. The threats didn't quite exist, right? And in the last several years, ransomware specifically, but threat from other actors has flipped the script on Active Directory. And so now you've got this 24-year-old product that 95% of the largest enterprise companies in the world rely on, even if it's not, front and center of your the way you log into your Salesforce and whatnot, but it's happening behind the scenes. It's managing the airport's flight scheduling, right? It's managing manufacturing plans, because a lot of the older, on-premise software is run in Active Directory. And so as I said, now it's an older, mostly not secured or not built with security in mind product, right? And it makes a lot of these enterprises very vulnerable, not only to ransomware attacks, which we're seeing a lot of, unfortunately, and there's an increase around the world, but also insider threats as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Matthew.
I was going to mention, I talked with a customer recently who, they were starting, that was the journey maybe towards leaving Active Directory behind. And I'm like, well, okay, how long do you think that's going to take you? And they're like, 5 years. And I'm like, if I would have asked you 5 years ago, what would you have said? 5 years. So it's overall what we're seeing, where there's this have a very complex platform out there. And organizations are embracing new stuff. They're embracing the cloud, but there are so much tied into this, pillar of organizational security that, it's a place where we just continue to invest. We continue to see challenges, and we continue to produce solutions.
Yeah, and as a legacy platform, I can see where old installations set up a certain way with policies set up a certain way. You might leave yourself a little vulnerable, but the platform is kept up as well, right? In terms of, maybe I'm wrong, but identity of people and systems, but we now have IoT and OT, and I don't know how much Active Directory is playing a role in there, but we have also APIs and services and machines that are acting on our behalf. I don't know, does AD dig into that at all?
I'd say yes and no, right? The challenge here is that, remember, Microsoft jumped on the cloud bandwagon several years ago, right? And all the investment went into Azure Active Directory, which makes a lot of sense. And Microsoft's, fortifying it, making it, fairly secure, and it's a great product. But as I said, these 95% of enterprise companies are still, they cannot physically leave Active Directory, and they won't be for a while. And that represents this challenge, right? So the architecturally, the product is not up to a modern standard, no matter how much you patch or whatnot. But also remember, Microsoft is not really neither selling it nor investing into it. And it's been going on for probably more than a decade now, right? How long has Azure been around for? That's a huge challenge.
So we're still sitting with that situation there.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's a situation where, not only is there not a lot of investment, but just the design of it. Like, it's not, some of the things that we see regarding challenges with Active Directory, you couldn't produce a patch to patch out. It would break the fundamental aspects of it. So, again, that's where we're seeing a huge amount of challenges. Not only is there not investment in that, Microsoft's solution to a lot of these problems, move to the cloud. And, as Sergey said, that is just not an option for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think about it as a attack surface for a lot of companies, right? Yes, there's the EDR, XDR. We, 20 years ago or whatnot, we were looking at the signature-based security, right? And then the threat actors evolved, and we started to look at the perimeter, based protection. That's not enough these days, right? So again, you need to obviously continue to invest into all these tools. We're at RSA, right? So threat detection and response is the new, hot thing, especially with AI.
Right.
Absolutely makes sense. About half of the vendors are building some sort of, threat detection and response capabilities into their products. But if you look at it if I'm a CISO, if I'm a member of a board of directors of a company, they need to be looking at the overall attack surface holistically, right? In Active Directory, if you think about it from the risk register standpoint, right? Active Directory is a key asset. It's sort of behind the walls, it's hidden, right? But so the risk of losing it is probably not very high relatively, right? Because there's a lot of protections along the way. But if you do lose it because of the criticality of it, your business comes to a standstill. The employees show up on Monday morning to their office, or these days, probably a hybrid workforce, work from home or whatnot. They cannot get into the buildings. They cannot log into their computers because guess what? Yeah. Most of it is driven by Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, so all your identities.
Okay.
Yeah, and more than that, actually really recently in the news, the Microsoft terms the Mercury incident. I don't know whether anyone's listening to this has had a chance to look into the sort of the technical aspects of what happened there, but Active Directory was absolutely a path that the attackers went through, leveraged a lot of like those old school, one of my hobby horses, which is group policy, leveraged that and then moved that their dominance into the cloud from there. So it absolutely, got this system that you can't get rid of that increases your attack surface, even if you're investing in all the cool new stuff, Azure and Internet of Things and the whole kit and caboodle.
So how aware are security leaders with respect to the challenges they face here? Is it something top of mind, or is it because it is hidden that they just don't pay attention much?
Now that's an interesting question. So in my experience, it varies a lot. And there is kind of an unfortunate, I think it's part of the history of a lot of organizations, that there's this sort of firewall a little bit between what you consider the traditional Active Directory people and then the security people. And part of that challenge is also generational. I could spend another hour or whatever talking about what we're seeing as far as like the retiring talent when it comes to AD. AD is a pretty mature technology, and we're not seeing a lot of like the young folks really learning all that well. So to specifically answer your question, I think it drops off the radar or becomes this is a team that we interface with rather than an integrated part of an overall security methodology, which is where it needs to be.
Yeah, it's interesting that Matthew's bringing up or alluding to the security talent shortage. We're seeing that, the stat from Microsoft, 700,000 open positions worldwide. That's continuing obviously to increase, but things are much gloomier in anything on-prem, Active Directory, Azure Active Directory.
It's not new and shiny.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's graduating from MIT and they're saying, oh, I'm going to be an Active Directory security expert, right? And that's a challenge. As a matter of fact, a few weeks ago, I was talking to one of the prospects, and the company has had the Active Directory admin job open for a year, and nobody's applying just because there's no talent, and it's very difficult. And answering your earlier question about whether the business understands the criticality of it, I think there's a bit of a gap between the people in the trenches, the managers, identity managers, IT people who understand that they are responsible for this key asset. We use the metaphor keys to the kingdom, right. But it truly is the keys to the kingdom, right? Because of the impact that it will have in your organization. A lot of business leaders, as I said, there's a little bit of a gap here, right? A lot of business leaders tend to look at it kind of maybe a little bit of too much of a high level view, and they don't understand the inherent importance of Active Directory.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I like to think in terms of pictures and where this fits into the organization and what it does, and we can always look to the CIA triad, right? So seems like a lot of effort generally in security is around confidentiality, protecting the data, be it customer or IP or whatever it is. And availability is always key. We often miss the integrity piece, I feel. But even still, if you're disconnected from the AD group and the security teams, what are some of the systems and processes that AD enables that if one of the CIA elements are compromised or jeopardized, that the company, you mentioned one, you can't log in, can't access the building, but are there other things that companies just kind of miss out on?
Well, when it comes to what Active Directory does, it actually fits into what's probably one of the more frontier elements of overall security, like network-based security. I mean, when I've got a little bit of gray in my beard now, and when I was starting in the IT world, like that's where it was. That's who the security team often were network folks. They were setting up access rules, and the idea was we're going to keep the outside from getting in. Mm-hmm. Well, now your security is your identity, and that's what security is wrapped around. So, when I authenticate with Quest, it doesn't matter what network I'm on. Who I am and how I authenticate is where I get access to. So Active Directory is an integral part of that in almost every organization, because your identity is going to flow through Active Directory. Even if technically you might be authenticating to a cloud endpoint, if that's synchronized with AD, then it's part of that pillar of identity that modern organizations who are enabling a modern workforce are having to solve for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you maybe a good business example. Last week we were talking to a car manufacturer, a big brand, and and they specifically called out that they're making trucks, and they specifically called out a use case. I was thinking, hey, your CEO is not going to be able to get into their computer, and just the reputational damage. And they said, well, look, this is all bad, but what's really bad is we have a customer. This is their example. They said that we have a truck full of caviar somewhere in the desert of Arizona, and it breaks down. And we have an SLA, a service level agreement, with that customer to send a maintenance vehicle within a certain number of time, right, to do the repairs. If our directory is down, we don't even know about that service request coming to us. We don't know who to dispatch and when and how. That's a much bigger problem in a competitive market, and we all are competing against somebody at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's who cares how the AD went down, right? Just the fact that it's down, it's not just a compromise that has to be recovered in terms of security response. It's more of an IT business impact issue to deal with there.
Yeah, correct. And one of the challenges we're trying to educate the market on is that it's not just IT's responsibility. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, the old thinking is it's some IT guys or girls job to make sure it works. There's much more than that. Maybe the configuration and keeping up and running, that's IT. But again, as Matthew is saying, identities are at the center of attacks. I think the latest stat from Gartner, about 80% or more of cyber attacks of all kinds, not just ransomware, target identity and involve identity, because it's the easiest way. You get into the organization, you spearfish, take a 30,000, 50,000 person company. Somebody's going to click on something, right? And at some point, inevitably, your perimeter defenses and your EDR, it'll fail, or it'll be just too slow to respond, right? And so ultimately, there is this high risk of somebody getting to that identity and using moving laterally or escalating privileges and causing a lot of damage to the company.
So in the because you've mentioned resilience a few times now. So in the context of resilience, what does Quest do? How do you sit in the environment? How do you enable the teams, which teams, and to do what they need to do? And what's the ultimate outcome of that?
When I ride up the elevator and someone asks me kind of, okay, what do you do? The way I usually explain it, a little old school, but I do like using the NIST framework. So, just really briefly, it's about assessing an environment as it stands. It's about detecting changes to that, putting in preventative controls. It's about response and recovery. And so we play a part in each of those. Basically trying to understand if an environment is culpable for exposure, indications of exposure, a bad configuration, a bad pathway, an open, attack path through AD, through Azure AD. Then, of course, it's seen if not only
I'm going to pause. Is that to it and from it? Both?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So that's all activity. That's a great question. Great point. Secondly, of course, is seeing when that environment changes, seeing when something might be actively being compromised, or just configurations drift. Being able to have unprecedented visibility greater than the normal platform can give. And then, of course, being able to put in preventative controls. So when there aren't tooling, again, I'm going to use my favorite example, group policy, not to get too nerdy here, but put in governance with rollback and actual approval systems so that companies can avoid attacks like the Mercury attack. And then finally, kind of wrapping up with response and recovery. At the end of the day, you need to be able to put things back the way they were. And Active Directory is an incredibly complex system from a technical level to put back the way it was. And we've been doing that for 20 years. And
that includes, I presume, some of your database and backup and restore and all that stuff.
That's
as well.
Right. Active Directory, again, not to get too nerdy, is a multi-master replicating database that anyone who has tried to recover it manually knows and has probably lost a few hairs around it. So we make that a lot simpler.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting that we're seeing more and more modern attacks going after or using Active Directory specifically, right? I think last year we saw a couple of attacks that were using group policy objects specifically to disable your EDR system, which is a nice, nifty kind of backdoor, right? You can be a privileged admin and you can do that, or you can just use policy objects, right? And we're seeing more and more of that, unfortunately. And in the modern environment, right, there's the proliferation of AI and ransomware as a service, and just making the market is developing for the threat actors, right, making it much cheaper and easier for them to enter these companies, right, and break through the defenses. And unfortunately, we feel like it's putting a lot of the customers at a weaker position, because they are focusing on 0 days, which are extremely important. They're focusing on, as I said, the active threat detection and response, which is paramount to your security. We're not talking a lot about the preventative measures, right? And I think that's what, at least we us as Quest, right, we're trying to sort of beat the drum and educate the market on the importance of it. And it's not only Active Directory on-premise, it's Azure Active Directory, right? Matthew mentioned some of the configuration changes and whatnot. In both in Azure and even in AWS, when it comes to accounts or your Azure Active Directory, there are literally thousands and thousands of different configuration settings. Gives you so many variations that just nobody really knows if you're adequately protected, if your configuration is correct or not. And the worst thing is that it's very difficult to see when that configuration changes, right? So the configuration drift is another challenge.
Yeah, I want to pile onto that one, because that is the number one thing that I hear as a challenge from customers, kind of shifting from AD to Azure AD. Azure AD is intrinsically more secure. Microsoft has done a great job of designing it. But there's this aspect of Active Directory that you do kind of know where your problems probably lie. It is a well-established technology, but there's a lot of unknowns, to steal a turn of phrase with Azure Active Directory, where you might think that you have things configured correctly, but because it's a constantly evolving platform without any specific upgrade, who knows, maybe you missed a communication or something like that. It does keep our customers up at night, okay, well, is this right? And if it was right yesterday, is it still right today? And it will still be right tomorrow. So it's an interesting problem. It's not a bad problem, but it's an interesting one.
So as we come close to the end here, how does this fit into the bigger picture? And the question that comes to mind is, you spot something, right? Either a change in configuration or an activity that shouldn't be taking place. How do you relay that information to the right team so they know what they need to do, when they need to do it, what steps they need to take to recover or at least prevent something bad from happening?
Absolutely. I kind of spoke quickly past it, but again, returning back to that whole sort of NIST view, that's really that response. And I think it was recently, I think Gartner, maybe last year, coined the term ITDR, which is sort of the sister discipline to EDR, endpoint detection and response.
Oh, yeah.
So it's identity detection and response. So basically, that needs to be a discipline and a program. That is not something that can be solved with technology, but that's one of the most key things, is to basically know what you're looking for, and then have a proper response plan with the proper escalations in place in order to deal with that on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
So
and practice it.
Exactly, it's practice. And vendors like Quest can give all the greatest information in the world, but you still have to have an ingestion mechanism, a way to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And as Matthew said, we're following NIST closely, and I think the government, and the U.S. government in particular, has made pretty great progress in helping the cyber firms and vendors to advance to a more standardized way of looking at protecting the environments, customer environments. Everything starts with identifying risks, right?
Yep.
Identifying these risks, taken some action to protect your environment. We use the term cyber resiliency, right? This is all before any attacks really happen, left of boom, right? But then when there's an active attack, you need to be able to detect it. You need to be able to quickly respond to it, remediate, right? If all that failed, you need to recover.
Yep.
And that's including your data, including your identities, everything, right? And so following that sort of A to Z, right? This is primarily this is the risk reduction play that we're talking to a lot of our customers about, right? This is something that needs to be talked at the board level, the CISO level, the CEO level, because ultimately that's the business continuity conversation.
Right.
It's not an IT challenge.
Yep. Perfect. Well, Sergey, Matthew, it's been a pleasure. I don't know any final word you want to say. No.
Just excited about being at RSA. Excited to meet you, and I think lots of great stuff for our customers in the future.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yep. Hopefully some good conversations this week, and thanks for sharing a bit about Quest and what you're doing to help protect identities. Key pillar of everything business, right?
Right on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this podcast, share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. Thank you for listening.